One, right next to you. Already gone. She was crying in his arms, and he didn't notice. That was the moment she realized something quietly. The man holding her had already left. Emotionally. Long before he ever chose to physically walk away. He was right there beside her, still warm. Still familiar, close enough to hear her breathing. Yet somehow farther away than any stranger. No fight happened, no betrayal took place. No slammed door, no dramatic ending at all. Just a silence so deep. It felt like grief. She kept waiting for him to look at her. To ask what was wrong, to feel her shaking. But his eyes stayed somewhere else entirely. Focused on a world that no longer held her. And that's what hurt more than anything else. Not that he hated her, not even close. But that he had simply stopped seeing her. If you've ever felt that kind of absence from someone who never actually left, then this story might feel uncomfortably familiar. 2 small things he stopped doing. It didn't change all at once, not really. There was no single moment to point at. Nothing she could say, that's when it broke. It was quieter than that, much smaller. Almost invisible, easy to miss at first. He stopped asking about her day. Not suddenly, just less often over time. At first, she thought he was just tired. Work had been heavy, his mind distracted. So she tried to fill the silence herself. She talked more, smiled more, kept things light. But then she noticed something else. It wasn't just quiet, it felt like absence. When she laughed, he used to really look. Like it meant something, like it mattered. Now he just nodded, barely lifting his eyes. When she spoke, he used to lean closer. Now his attention drifted somewhere else. His phone, the TV, anything but her voice. And when she asked, "Are you okay?" he always said, "Yeah, just tired." Same tone, flat, every single time. It wasn't cruel, and that confused her. No anger, no harsh words, no rejection. Just a slow withdrawal she couldn't explain. Like someone lowering the volume of a song. So slowly, you don't notice it fading. Until suddenly, it's almost completely gone. She started questioning herself quietly. Maybe she was too sensitive, maybe too much. Maybe this is just how relationships become. So she adjusted, little by little. She spoke less, so she wouldn't bother him. She laughed softer, to avoid feeling ignored. She stopped asking things she already knew. And the more she tried to make it easier, the more invisible she slowly became. The hardest part wasn't what he did. It was what he stopped doing completely. Those small things that once made her feel seen. Now gone, without explanation, without words. And deep down, she could feel it clearly. This wasn't just distance from circumstances. This was someone choosing not to show up anymore. 3. The pattern you can't unsee. At first, it felt like isolated moments. Small things, easy to excuse or dismiss. A distracted reply here, a missed detail there. A silence that lasted just a bit too long. But over time, those moments started aligning. And forming something harder to ignore. It became a pattern. Every evening started feeling the same. She would walk in carrying something inside. An idea, a story, a feeling to share. And he would be there, physically present. But already somewhere else in his mind. His responses came just a second too late. His eyes drifted before she even finished. And the space between them, just inches wide, started feeling impossible to cross. She tried adjusting how she showed up. Choosing her words more carefully each time. Shortening her stories, softening her tone. Laughing earlier, just to hold his attention. But nothing changed, not really. If anything, it became even clearer. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it anymore. She began recognizing his rhythm of distance. How he leaned in just enough sometimes. Just enough to keep things from breaking. Then slowly pulled away again afterward. Not enough to end things completely. But never enough to truly stay present. And that's where confusion started living. He wasn't leaving, but he wasn't staying. There were nights she stopped mid-sentence. Just watching him, waiting to be noticed. Sometimes he did, briefly, just enough to say, "What?" and look confused. And in that moment, something hit her deeply. He wasn't listening to understand her. He was listening just enough to respond. And that difference changed everything. Because now it wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was something she could see, predict. And no matter what, she couldn't ignore it. The night she realized. It happened on a very ordinary night. Which somehow made it feel even heavier. No storm outside, no broken glass. No dramatic argument to remember forever. Just a quiet room, dim lighting, stillness. A life that looked completely normal outside. She had been holding herself together all day. Smiling when needed, nodding at conversations. Answering questions with that practiced voice. The one people used to avoid deeper questions. By the time she got home, she was exhausted. Not the kind fixed by sleep, something deeper. She didn't need solutions that night. Didn't need advice, or a long speech. She just needed to feel noticed. And he was right there. Close enough to hear him breathing softly. Close enough to lean into his chest. For a moment, she let herself hope. Maybe tonight would feel different somehow. Maybe he would look up, maybe ask. Maybe he would notice her silence. So she sat beside him, and said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say. But because she wanted to see something real. Could love, real love, still recognize pain? Without needing it explained out loud? A minute passed, then another. He kept scrolling on his phone. Light from the screen moved across his face. While hers stayed hidden in the dark. She watched him, waiting for something small. A shift, a pause, a sign of awareness. But nothing came. And then, the tears did. Quietly, without sound, without drama. They slipped down her face slowly. While the closest person to her noticed nothing. That was the moment something changed inside. Not shattered, not broken apart loudly. Just something quietly shifted forever. Because pain from distance is one thing. Pain from inches away is something else. He finally looked up and asked softly, "You okay?" But it felt late, not cruel, just late. Like hearing a fire alarm. After everything has already burned down. And she understood it clearly then. Something she had been avoiding for months. The loneliness wasn't from being alone anymore. It came from being unseen, right beside him. That night, she faced the hardest truth. Someone can hold your body. And still miss your breaking heart. And once you feel that, truly feel it. You can't pretend the silence means nothing again. The wound has a name. For a long time, she explained it away. In ways that hurt just a little less. Maybe he was stressed, maybe overwhelmed. Maybe this was just a difficult season. Maybe love, after time, becomes quieter. Flatter, harder to reach, less intense. She told herself these things often. Because they were easier than the truth. But the truth was sharper than sadness. More personal than just growing apart. What she felt had a shape, a pattern. Something real, something definable. It was emotional unavailability. And strangely, naming it didn't hurt more. It made things clearer, easier to see. Because emotional unavailability isn't always cruel. Sometimes it looks polite, calm, functional. Like someone doing everything right externally. They come home, say the expected things. Stand beside you in photos, remember routines. Ask if you ate, if you're okay. But when things turn real, something changes. When grief enters, when fear needs comfort. When silence is asking to be understood. They disappear, in a way no one notices. That's what she struggled to explain. He wasn't absent in obvious ways. He was absent exactly where it mattered most. He could handle surface-level life easily. Plans, errands, conversations about tomorrow. But when emotions required presence, something inside him seemed to shut down. His face stayed neutral, voice steady. Body still physically near her. But emotionally, he stepped away quietly. As if closeness itself felt like danger. And once she saw it clearly, everything shifted. She stopped calling herself too sensitive. Stopped turning pain into personal failure. Stopped believing she needed to change more. It wasn't about saying things better. Or needing less, or waiting longer. This wasn't a communication issue. And it wasn't about asking too much. The wound had a name, and that mattered. Because unnamed pain keeps you confused. You keep blaming your tone, your needs. You keep shrinking yourself to survive silence. But once you name it, something shifts inside. You realize being unseen can deeply wound you. Just like direct rejection can. You realize love without cruelty can still leave invisible bruises. And sometimes, the hardest relationships to leave are the ones that don't look broken outside. She wasn't in confusion anymore. She was inside a quiet kind of wound. One people rarely talk about openly. The kind where someone stays close enough to keep your hope alive, but never close enough to hold your heart. 6. Maybe it was never about him. This was the part she resisted most. It felt easier to study him endlessly. To analyze his silence, his distance. The way he could be beside her. Yet never truly arrive emotionally. As long as the focus stayed on him. She could keep hoping things would change. That one day he would explain everything. Fix it, or finally understand her. But pain has a way of shifting perspective. And eventually, it turned the mirror around. And what she saw was harder to face. This wasn't just about loving someone unavailable. It was also about why that felt familiar. Why did she stay so long, feeling alone? Why did she work so hard to be easy? Patient, understanding, low maintenance, forgiving? Why did she accept crumbs as closeness? And silence as something stable? The answers didn't come all at once. They came slowly, like distant memories returning. Maybe, long before him, she learned something. That love had to be earned, not received freely. Maybe she learned being good meant needing less. That if someone pulled away, you stayed softer. If they distanced, you waited quietly. If they couldn't meet you emotionally, you became smaller, so it hurt less. And once she saw that, everything shifted again. Now it wasn't just about him anymore. It was also about her, abandoning herself. Just to stay chosen by someone else. That realization hurt differently. Sharper, deeper, more honest than before. Not because she blamed herself for his absence. She didn't, not really. But she finally understood something important. Why she had normalized emotional neglect. Why she called survival, love. Why she kept reaching for someone who could only ever stay halfway. She saw the deeper pattern beneath everything. It wasn't just his inability to be present. It was her ability to live on, almost. Almost heard, almost held, almost loved fully. And that realization was both painful, powerful. Because once you see the wound started earlier, you stop waiting for someone else to heal it. You ask a different question entirely. Not, why wasn't I enough for him? But, why did I shrink to keep love? That question changed everything inside her. For the first time, she wasn't just grieving him. She was grieving every past version of herself. The ones who survived on emotional leftovers. And called it devotion. 7. You can be held. And still be alone. You can be held, and still feel alone. That might be the quietest heartbreak there is. Because someone's arms can be around you, while their heart is somewhere far away. Loneliness doesn't always come from abandonment. Sometimes it comes from being unseen. Even by the person closest to you. She finally understood something simple. Being held is not the same as being known. Closeness without presence feels colder than distance. And the hardest goodbyes aren't always spoken. Sometimes they happen slowly, in silence. While two people still share the same room. If this felt personal, there's a reason. Some wounds don't leave bruises, only echoes. So if someone comes to mind right now, maybe share this with them. And if you saw yourself in her silence, maybe say something, even just a little. Because some feelings don't have easy words. And sometimes, being understood changes everything.